Do you remember Pickle Rick? You know, the guy who turned himself into a pickle? Back in my day, that was the funniest shit ever. But have you ever thought what life would actually be like as a pickle? How the conscious experience of being a pickle would feel? This is exactly what philosopher Thomas Nagel was thinking back in 1974 when he wrote this essay called What's It Like to Be a Bat? Obviously, back in the 70s, Pickle Rick did not exist. So our friend Nagel didn't care about the feelings of pickles. But the premise of his essay was the same. What would life as a bat actually feel like? Our friend here was less concerned about doing a Morbius cosplay, obviously, but was more interested in every philosopher's favorite topic since the dawn of time: consciousness. But what the hell is consciousness? Everyone loves consciousness. It's a clearly defined, well-researched area of psychology that most psychologists are well read about. Well, actually, I just made everything up, because that is not fucking true. We know almost nothing about consciousness. If I were to ask you, do you know what it is? You'd probably say yeah, because most people have a vague understanding of what consciousness is. But if I asked you what it actually was, if you could explain it to me, well, there'd be some issues. It's this big paradox where we're at this invisible impasse of defining consciousness. As this guy once said,
indeed, you might say that consciousness is at once the most familiar thing in the world and the most mysterious. Consciousness is what we start with.
And of course, he's 100% right. And that's what makes it so frustrating. Sure, you can Google consciousness's definition and get this BS answer, which says something and nothing at the same time. Because you and I know that consciousness is not this. It's that intangible feeling that we just can't describe. It's what living feels like. But we as humans hate unanswered questions. So of course, in typical human fashion, we've tried answering this question for millennia. Now there are many theories about consciousness that if I went into, would just take me forever to explain, ranging from people thinking certain parts of the brain code for different aspects of consciousness to people thinking the rocks are conscious. And I'm going to be honest, I can't be asked to go into all that. So, if you're curious about those theories, which are pretty interesting, so I recommend it, I put a bunch of videos in the description if you want to check it out. Anyways, let's get back to our main man, Nagel. Nagel thinks that science and physicalism are stupid. In case you don't know what this is, to make it short and sweet, it's just a theory that basically everything that exists in the universe has to be made of something, including thoughts and ideas. Physicalism states that all that stuff is just physically stored in our brains, but our goat Nagel has got an ace up his sleeve that cooks this idea: consciousness. To help us understand how he will do this, let me just set something straight so we're all on the same page, and I'm not just yapping to you and going nowhere. Physicalism and science are both what we would call reductive. Essentially, they take an idea, object, or process and strip them of any subjective bits that they have and explain them objectively. Stay with me now. Let me just give you an example to explain this a little bit more clearly. Let's take the phenomena of lightning. First of all, there's the subjective experience of lightning that we humans have. Sometimes when it rains, there are these big, flashy things that are loud. Sometimes they burn stuff, and they make me feel a certain way. They might make me piss my pants, or I might find them pretty cool. But anyways, there's some sort of feeling. This is what lightning is like, from your particular subjective perspective. Quite the mouthful, I know. This is your own subjective experience of this natural phenomenon, and we won't negate it and say it's not real, because it is, just like lightning, something that exists. But science doesn't really care about your feelings here, unfortunately. It says, screw the subjective experiences people have with said phenomena, because they are not objective truths. And so, they're pretty difficult to work with. And in all fairness, science kind of has a point. So, science reduces lightning by only keeping the objective bits about it. It only wants to explain what it fundamentally is, that lightning, at the end of the day, is just a discharge of electrons. But in order to get to this conclusion, science has to get rid of all the subjectivity that you and I might have to reach this conclusion. Here's the part where consciousness comes in. You see, consciousness is by definition a subjective experience. The conscious experience of me is not the same as it is for you, or for a squirrel, or for a talking pickle. They all feel different and unique and subjective. That feeling you get when you take in a beautiful view, or when you feel cozy, or when you feel pain, those feelings and experiences are purely subjective. They cannot be defined objectively. I know, it's a lot to take in, and pretty confusing at first, but this is the basis of Nagel's argument. Science can explain the process of how and why we feel pain, but that feeling of pain, it'll never get close, because that feeling is subjective. The rest of that process can be simply explained objectively. Nagel shows this with our bat as an example. Bats, as you might or might not know, use echolocation to detect obstacles at nighttime when they can't see very well. But Nagel begs the question, what does that feel like? What the hell does echolocation feel like? Truth is, we already know. Therefore, the experience, the feeling, the consciousness of a bat is subjective. It's different to our conscious experience. Because when I look around, I use my eyes. I can never imagine screaming at a rock and seeing it. It doesn't really make sense to me. Hence, consciousness is subjective. And in the same way that I can't imagine what it's like to be a bat, I can't imagine what it's like to be a talking pickle, or an ant, or a dolphin. Sure, we can try to imagine how it would be like to be a little human inside these animals or things, but to imagine what it's like to be for them is just impossible. Therefore, how in the hell can science explain the subjective thing we call consciousness? And how can the universe be made up of physical objective things if clearly something like consciousness is everywhere? And it exists, and it's subjective. Two birds with one stone. Nagel just got a collat on these two ideas. Science simply cannot explain consciousness, because if it tried to do so, it would have to explain it objectively. But consciousness, as we all know, and I have said a million times, and so has Nagel, is not objective. So by doing so, you would have a definition of something that isn't consciousness, and we would have gone nowhere. And that's the conclusion. So unfortunately, our friend Thomas Nagel doesn't know what life is like as a bat, or a pickle. But his essay uses that to illustrate the concepts of subjectivity and objectivity, and how science and physicalism work, but most importantly, that the scientific method is just useless for explaining and defining consciousness or any subjective experience at that. I'm no expert in philosophy, and this essay is so damn complicated that reading it is confusing, and understanding it is even more confusing, especially because of how old it is. I just wanted to put this video out there to show my take and understanding on the matter in a simpler way. And if anything I said is wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you sometime. Bye.